there is a quiet truth most of us resist. We are far smaller in vision than we are in design. We sketch our lives in pencil, while something greater has already written it in ink. What you call delay, heaven may call preparation. What you name limitation, eternity may know as positioning. The plan over your life is not merely larger, it is deeper, wiser, and far more enduring than your present sight allows. We are, by nature, creatures confined to fragments. Our sight is narrow, not only in what we see but in how we interpret what is seen. We measure life by moments, by immediate outcomes, by what appears sensible within the limits of our understanding. Yet there exists a design that does not bend itself to our short horizons. It is not troubled by what troubles us, nor hurried by what we believe must be resolved at once. What we often call confusion is, in truth, the collision between our partial vision and a plan that was never meant to be fully grasped in pieces. A man standing too close to a great painting may complain of meaningless strokes and clashing colors, unaware that his nearness is the very thing that robs him of clarity. Step back, and what seemed chaotic begins to reveal intention. But in life we are rarely granted that distance. We stand within the painting itself, attempting to judge its worth while still surrounded by unfinished edges. It is no wonder then that we mistake process for disorder and timing for neglect. There is also within us a persistent desire to be the author rather than the participant. We do not merely wish to live our lives, we wish to control them, to outline every chapter and predict every turn. Yet authorship requires a knowledge we do not possess. It demands an understanding of consequences far beyond the present moment, a weaving together of threads that stretch into places we cannot see. What feels to us like a misstep may, in a larger telling, be the very turning point upon which everything depends. We often assume that what is visible carries the greatest weight. If progress is not evident, we conclude that none is being made. If doors remain closed, we decide there are no doors at all. But this assumption reveals more about our impatience than about reality. There are movements taking place beneath the surface of our lives, shaping, aligning, preparing in ways that defy immediate recognition. Roots grow in darkness long before any sign of life appears above the ground, and it would be foolish to declare the seed dead simply because the soil remains undisturbed. It is also worth considering how frequently our desires are shaped by incomplete knowledge. We ask for outcomes that seem good to us, yet are built upon assumptions that have not been tested by time. To be denied such desires is not always to be deprived. It may instead be to be protected from a version of life too small, too fragile to sustain what we were meant to carry. There is a certain mercy in not receiving everything we ask for, especially when our asking is guided more by fear or haste than by wisdom. The limitation of our perspective is not a flaw to be resented, but a condition to be acknowledged. It invites a different posture, one not rooted in control but in trust. To trust does not mean to understand fully, nor does it require the absence of questions. It simply means accepting that the one who sees the whole is not bound by the fragments that confine us, and that what appears incomplete to us may already be whole in a way we have yet to perceive, and so, when delay enters our lives, we are quick to name it as refusal. We assume that what has not yet arrived will never come, or worse, that it has been intentionally withheld without purpose. Yet delay, in its truest sense, is not an empty pause but a filled space occupied with movement we cannot measure and intentions we cannot yet decipher. Time, as we experience it, feels like a barrier, but in a greater design, it often serves as a bridge between what we are and what we must become. There is an impatience rooted deeply within us, a quiet insistence that things ought to unfold according to our preferred rhythm. We mark our expectations with invisible deadlines and grow disheartened when they pass unmet. But these timelines are of our own making, drawn from limited foresight and an incomplete understanding of consequence. What we call too late may, in fact, be precisely on time within a framework that accounts not only for our desires, but for our readiness, our character, and the unseen intersections of countless other lives. Consider how often we desire outcomes without the formation required to sustain them. To receive something significant too early is not always a gift, it can just as easily become a burden. Without the necessary wise strength, wisdom, or discipline, even the best of things can unravel in our hands. Delay, then, becomes a form of preparation, a quiet shaking of the inner life so that what is given later may be held with steadiness rather than squandered through immaturity. It is also true that delay has a way of revealing the nature of our faith. When what we hope for is immediate, belief requires little depth. But when time stretches and answers seem distant, something more enduring is called forth. We are invited to trust not in outcomes, but in the character of the one who governs them. This kind of trust is not loud or dramatic. It is often silent, steady, and forged in the ordinary moments where nothing appears to be changing, yet everything is being formed. We must also reckon with the possibility that delay is not solely about us. Lives are not isolated threads, they are woven together in ways far more intricate than we can perceive. What we are waiting for may depend upon circumstances beyond our sight, other people being prepared, other events aligning, other paths unfolding that will one day converge with our own. To rush such a process would be to risk a collision rather than harm. Oni, to arrive at something before it is fully ready to receive us. There is, too, a certain refinement that only time can accomplish. Quick answers may satisfy the surface, but they rarely transform the depths. Delay has a way of pressing us inward, confronting us with questions we might otherwise avoid, and shaping within us a resilience that cannot be produced in haste. It strips away illusions of control and replaces them, slowly and often reluctantly, with a quieter, more enduring dependence. In this way, what we experience as waiting is not a void but a workshop. Though we may feel still, we are not stagnant. Though we may feel forgotten, we are not unseen. The silence of the present moment does not indicate absence, but rather a different kind of activity, one that unfolds beyond the reach of immediate perception, yet moves with a precision that does not falter. Even when our understanding does falter, and it is often within the very heart of struggle that this unseen work becomes most profound. We are inclined to view hardship as interruption, as though it were an unwelcome detour from the life we were meant to live. Yet it may be that struggle is not diverting us from the path, but engraving it more deeply within us. What feels like resistance is, at times, the shaping of a strength we would not otherwise acquire, a quiet forging that takes place beneath the weight of difficulty. There is a kind of growth that comfort cannot produce. Ease may preserve us, but it rarely transforms us. It is in moments of pressure, uncertainty, and even pain that something within us is called to rise beyond its former limits. We discover capacities we did not know we possessed, not because we sought them, but because the circumstances demanded them. In this sense, struggle becomes less an enemy and more a severe instructor on compromising, yet not without purpose. We often ask for strength without recognizing the form in which it arrives. It does not come as a sudden endowment, fully formed and effortless. Instead, it emerges through endurance, through the repeated choice to continue when retreat would be easier. Each difficulty becomes an opportunity, not merely to survive, but to be altered subtly at first, then more visibly over time. What begins as resistance gradually becomes resilience, and what once seemed unbearable becomes, in retrospect, the very thin that expanded our capacity to stand. There is also within struggle a revealing quality. It exposes what is fragile, what is misplaced, what has been built upon uncertain ground. In easier seasons, such weaknesses may remain hidden, unnoticed beneath the surface of apparent stability. But when pressure is applied, the truth of our foundations becomes evident. This is not cruelty, but a kind of clarity and opportunity to rebuild more firmly, to let go of what cannot endure and to strengthen what must remain. Yet the most significant work of struggle often occurs beyond what can be immediately seen. While we focus on the external challenge, something internal is being reshaped. Patience is stretched, humility is deepened, and a certain dependence begins to take root, not as a sign of weakness, but as a recognition of our proper place within a larger order. We begin, slowly, to relinquish the illusion that we are self-sufficient, and in doing so, we make room for a strength that is not entirely our own. It is also worth noting that the value of struggle is rarely apparent in the moment. While we are within it, our vision remains clouded by discomfort and urgency. We long for resolution, for relief, for any sign that the weight will lift. But meaning often reveals itself only in retrospect, when we are able to look back and trace the quiet transformations that occurred while we were simply trying to endure. What once seemed like a season of loss may be understood, in time, as a period of formation. And so the struggle you face may not be a sign that something has gone wrong, but rather that something is being made right at a depth you cannot yet measure. It may be shaping a strength that will one day be required, preparing you for responsibilities not yet visible, or aligning your inner life with a purpose that demands more than you currently possess. What appears on the surface as strain and resistance may, in truth, be the careful and deliberate work of building within you something that will not easily break. Even when the visible circumstances give little indication of such progress, and it is precisely in these unnoticed beginnings that some of the greatest purposes quietly take root. We are drawn, almost instinctively, to what is grand, immediate, and unmistakably significant. We admire what stands tall and commands attention, often forgetting that nearly everything of lasting value begins in obscurity. The tendency to overlook small beginnings is not merely an error of judgment, it is a failure to understand the nature of growth itself. What is small is not necessarily insignificant, it is often simply early. A beginning, by its very nature, carries no evidence of its final form. It does not announce what it will become, nor does it display the fullness of its potential. Instead, it appears modest, even unimpressive, easily dismissed by those who measure worth by immediate scale. Yet within such beginnings lies a depth that cannot be assessed at a glance, a quiet capacity that unfolds only through time and persistence. There is a certain discipline required to honor what is small. It asks us to invest without immediate reward, to remain faithful in actions that seem too minor to matter. We are tempted to wait for something larger, something more obviously meaningful, before we give our full attention. But this waiting often becomes a form of neglect, causing us to miss the very opportunities through which greater things are meant to emerge. What will handle lightly in its infancy may never reach the maturity we later claim to desire. It is also true that small beginnings serve a purpose beyond mere initiation. They shape the manner in which growth occurs. Rapid expansion without foundation often leads to collapse, while gradual development allows for depth and stability. In this way, what feels slow or limited may, in fact, be wisely restrained. Each step, though seemingly modest, contributes to a structure that can bear weight over time. To rush such a process would be to build upon uncertainty, creating something impressive in appearance but fragile in reality. We must also consider how perspective influences our valuation of beginnings. From within the moment, the progress appears minimal, almost negligible. We compare where we are to where we wish to be, and the distance between the two feels discouraging. Yet this comparison overlooks the significance of direction. A small step taken faithfully is not trivial, it is movement aligned with purpose. Over time, such steps accumulate, forming a path that could not have been achieved through sudden leaps alone. There is, too, a humility embedded within small beginnings. Do not allow for pride or self-sufficiency to take root easily, for they require patience, consistency, and often the willingness to remain unseen. This hiddenness is not a mark of failure but a protection against premature elevation. To be placed too quickly into prominence without the necessary formation is to risk losing both direction and substance. Small beginnings, therefore, act as a kind of safeguard, ensuring that growth is not only outward but inward as well. What is concealed at the start often becomes evident only in its time. The seed does not resemble the tree, yet it contains everything required for its becoming. To judge it solely by its present appearance is to misunderstand its nature entirely. In the same way, the early stages of purpose may seem disconnected from their eventual outcome, lacking the clarity we so deeply desire. But this lack of clarity does not imply absence of intention, it simply reflects the unfolding of something too vast to be revealed all at once. And so, what appears small in your life now may carry a weight far beyond its present form. It may be the beginning of something that will one day extend further than you can currently imagine, though at this stage it asks only for your attention, your care, and your willingness to remain committed without the assurance of immediate significance. And it is often in these moments of apparent loss that the deeper movements of purpose begin to unfold. We are inclined to measure life by what we retain, by what remains within our grasp, and by what can be clearly counted as gain. Loss, then, feels like a contradiction and undoing of progress, a quiet erasure of something we believed was necessary. Yet it may be that what is taken away is not always meant to diminish us, but to make space for something that could not coexist with what we were holding. There is a certain weight attached to the things we cling to, even when they no longer serve the direction of our growth. We hold on to familiar patterns, relationships, ambitions, and expectations, not always because they are right, but because they are known. To release them willingly is difficult, to have them removed is often painful. Yet without such release, we may remain confined within a version of life too narrow to contain what we are meant to receive. Loss, in this sense, becomes not merely an ending but a clearing. It is also true that we do not always recognize the limitations of what we desire. What seems valuable to us may, in time, reveal itself to be insufficient or even obstructive. But while we are within its possession, we lack the perspective to see its shortcomings. To be separated from it, then, feels unjust, as though something good has been unjustly taken. Only later, with distance and reflection, do we begin to perceive that what we lost was, in fact, preventing something greater from taking root. There is a refinement that occurs through loss, a stripping away of what is unnecessary or misaligned. It confronts us with questions we might otherwise avoid. What truly matters, what endures, and what is worth building upon? In the absence of what once occupied our attention, we are given the opportunity, though not always the desire, to re-examine the foundations of our lives. This process is seldom comfortable, but it is often clarifying in ways that comfort could never achieve. We must also consider how loss reshapes our attachments. It reveals the extent to which we have placed our security in things that are, by nature, uncertain. When those things are removed, we are left to confront a deeper reality. That stability cannot ultimately rest upon what is temporary. This realization, though unsettling, opens the possibility of anchoring ourselves in something more enduring, something not so easily altered by circumstance. There is, too, a hidden mercy in the timing of certain losses. What is removed at one stage of life may have become far more damaging had it remained longer. We cannot always see this in the moment, as our understanding is confined to the immediate sense of absence. But timing is rarely arbitrary. What feels premature to us may, in fact, be precisely when the separation is most necessary, preventing a deeper entanglement that would have been far more difficult to undo. And yet, the space created by loss does not remain empty. Though it may feel so for a time, it is not a void without purpose. It is, rather, an opening, an unoccupied place where something new can be formed, something that could not have entered while the former thing remained. This newness does not always arrive quickly, nor does it always resemble what was lost. It may come in a different form, with a different shape, requiring a different kind of readiness. In this way, what we perceive as subtraction may, in truth, be a form of preparation. The removal of one thing allows for the introduction of another, not as a simple replacement, but as a progression towards something more fitting, more aligned with the deeper design at work within our lives, and it is often in the absence of certainty that something far more substantial begins to take shape. We are naturally inclined toward clarity, toward the comfort of knowing what lies ahead and how each step will unfold. Certainty feels like stability, like firm ground beneath our feet. Yet if we examine it closely, we may find that a life built entirely upon certainty leaves little room for trust, and even less for growth that extends beyond what we can already comprehend. Faith, in its truest sense, does not arise where everything is explained. It is not formed in the presence of complete understanding, nor does it depend upon visible assurances. Rather, it begins precisely where certainty ends, where the path ahead is obscured, and the outcome cannot be predicted with confidence. This is not because uncertainty is desirable in itself, but because it creates the necessary conditions for something deeper than knowledge to emerge. When all is known, there is little need to rely on anything beyond one's own perception. But when knowledge reaches its limit, we are confronted with a choice: to withdraw into fear and hesitation, or to step forward with a trust that is not supported by immediate evidence. This step is often quiet, almost imperceptible. Yet it marks the beginning of a different kind of strength, one that is not dependent on circumstances aligning perfectly before action is taken. It is important to understand that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to move despite it. Doubt may linger, questions may remain unanswered, and the future may still appear uncertain. Yet faith does not demand the removal of these elements, it simply refuses to let them dictate the course of action. In this way, it is less a feeling and more a posture, a steady inclination of the will toward trust, even when the mind seeks clearer proof. There is also a refining quality in uncertainty. It strips away superficial motivations and reveals what truly anchors us. When outcomes are guaranteed, our commitment may be influential, seeded by the promise of success. But when nothing is assured, we are forced to confront the deeper reasons behind our choices. Are we willing to continue without visible reward? Will we remain steadfast when the results are delayed or unclear? These questions, though uncomfortable, lead to a more genuine and enduring form of faith. We often imagine that clarity would strengthen our belief, that if only we could see the full picture, our trust would become unshakable. Yet such clarity might instead diminish the very thing it seeks to enhance. If every step were illuminated, faith would no longer be necessary, it would be replaced by simple observation. The unknown, therefore, is not an obstacle to faith, but its very foundation, the space in which it is both tested and strengthened. It is also worth considering that uncertainty expands our capacity to trust beyond ourselves. It reminds us that our understanding, though valuable, is not sufficient to grasp the entirety of what is unfolding. This recognition is not meant to discourage, but to reorient, to shift our dependence from what we can control to what we must learn to trust. In doing so, we begin to participate in a reality that is not confined to our immediate perception, but extends into something far more enduring and complete. And it is within this unfolding that the question of obedience quietly emerges. We often place great value on understanding, believing that clarity must precede action. We want reasons that satisfy us, explanations that align with our expectations, and a vision that assures us of the outcome before we commit to the path. Yet there is a subtle danger in this insistence, for it suggests that our willingness to act is conditional upon our ability to comprehend fully what lies ahead. Obedience, by contrast, does not rest upon complete understanding. It moves forward even when the reasons are only partially revealed, trusting that the one who sees the whole does not require our full comprehension in order to guide our steps. This does not mean that understanding is without value, but rather that it is not always a prerequisite for action. There are moments when waiting for complete clarity becomes, in itself, a form of resistance, a quiet refusal to proceed until the path is made entirely comfortable to our reasoning. We must also consider how limited our understanding truly is. What appears unclear to us may be perfectly coherent within a larger design. To demand full explanation before obedience is to assume that we are capable of grasping every necessary detail, that nothing lies beyond the reach of our perception. Yet experience continually reminds us that this is not the case. There are layers of purpose, intersections of circumstance, and long-reaching consequences that extend far beyond what we can presently discern. It is in this recognition that obedience finds its proper place. It is not blind in the sense of being irrational, but it is willing to act without possessing every answer. It acknowledges that guidance may come in increments, that the next step is often revealed without the entire journey being disclosed. To move in such a way requires a certain humility, the acceptance that we are participants in a plan, not its architects. There is also a quiet transformation that occurs through obedience itself. Understanding often follows action rather than preceding it. As we take steps forward, even with limited clarity, we begin to perceive connections that were previously hidden. What once seemed uncertain starts to take on form, not because all has been explained at once, but because movement has allowed insight to grow. In this way, obedience becomes not only a response to guidance, but a pathway to deeper awareness. We are often tempted to delay action until we feel ready, until our doubts have subsided and our confidence has solidified. But readiness, as we imagine it, may never fully arrive. If obedience were dependent upon perfect confidence, it would seldom occur. Instead, it is often in the very act of stepping forward, while uncertainty still lingers, that readiness begins to form. Courage is not the absence of hesitation, but the decision to proceed despite it. It is also worth noting that obedience reshapes our priorities. It shifts our focus from controlling outcomes to aligning with direction. Rather than asking, "Will this lead exactly where I want?" the question becomes, "Is this the step I am being called to take?" This subtle change alters the entire posture of our lives, moving us away from self-centered calculation toward a more attentive and responsive way of living. In this way, obedience carries a quiet strength. It does not require the full map, number, or does it insist upon guarantees. It simply responds to what has been made known, trusting that what remains unknown will be revealed in its proper time. As each step continues to unfold within a design that does not depend upon our complete understanding to remain faithful to its course, And it is often only when we reach the limits of our own plans that we begin to glimpse the beginning of something far greater. We spend much of our lives constructing paths, carefully arranging our ambitions, outlining our goals, and imagining outcomes that seem both reasonable and desirable. There is nothing inherently wrong in this. It reflects a natural desire for direction and purpose. Yet there comes a point where our plans, no matter how well formed, reveal their insufficiency. They falter, not always because they were misguided, but because they were never meant to carry the full weight of what our lives were designed to become. The end of our plan often feels like failure. It appears as though something has collapsed, as if the effort invested has been wasted or misdirected. We interpret closed doors as final verdicts, assuming that what we intended must now be abandoned without meaning. But this perception arises from our limited view of endings. What we call an end may, in truth, be a transition, a necessary conclusion to one chapter so that another, more fitting one, may begin. There is a certain attachment we form to our own designs. Having invested time, thought, and hope into them, we are reluctant to release them, even when they no longer align with the direction our lives are taking. To let go feels like surrendering control, admitting that our vision was incomplete. Yet this surrender is not an act of defeat, it is an opening. It creates space for a different kind of authorship, one not confined to our preferences or constrained by our foresight. We must also consider how narrowly we often define success. Our plans are shaped by what we can currently imagine, which is itself limited by experience, environment, and expectation. We aim for what appears attainable, what fits within the boundaries of our understanding. But in doing so, we may unknowingly set our sights too low, pursuing outcomes that, while good, fall short of what could have been. The unraveling of such plans, then, is not necessarily a loss of something great, but the removal of something too small. It is in the dismantling of our expectations that a deeper trust is invited. When our plans proceed smoothly, we may attribute progress to our own insight and effort. But when they come to an end, we are confronted with the reality that we are not the ultimate authors of our story. This realization, though unsettling, reorients us. It shifts our reliance away from our own limited designs toward a guidance that operates beyond what we can fully anticipate. There is also a transformation that occurs in how we perceive direction itself. Instead of clinging rigidly to a predetermined outcome, we begin to adopt a posture of openness, willing to be led rather than insisting on leading. This does not mean abandoning all intention, but it does require holding our plans with a certain looseness, recognizing that they are provisional, subject to change as a greater purpose unfolds. What replaces our plans is not chaos, but a different kind of order, one that may not be immediately visible, yet reveals itself over time with a coherence that exceeds our own attempts at arrangement. The path that emerges may differ significantly from what we had imagined, leading us through places we would not have chosen and into roles we did not foresee. Yet within this unexpected direction, there is often a deeper sense of alignment, as though we are finally moving in accordance with something that fits more truly than anything we had constructed for ourselves. And so, the end of your plan need not be feared as the collapse of purpose. It may instead be the threshold of it, the quiet moment where your own designs give way to something more expansive, more intricate, and more enduring than you could have conceived, even at your most hopeful beginnings.